Why isn't that saying live? Give me a sec. Dun, dun, dun. It says that I'm live. That's funny. Normally the software says whether I'm live or not, and it doesn't say that I'm live right now, but I can see the YouTube control panel says that I'm live, so I must be live. So boom, welcome to Tokyo Tonight 2. My name is Hiko Simon. Long time no see. Sorry, we've skipped a few lately. Last week, of course, we had the fire alarm system in the apartment building I'm in was broken 2 days in a row. Yes, it was making my lad a bit jumpy. So we all had an early night on that Sunday. Unfortunately, there were no more false alarms. And of course, I was sick a couple of weeks before that. It's just been, to tell you the truth, there's been a lot going on in Japan and news-wise, but it's just been also just a very busy time for me lately. Yes, it's good to be back. Good to see you all. Actually, good to be doing one of these shows. I'm slowly getting on top of all my work and all my other stuff and getting back into all of that. Summer has just started in Tokyo. It's gone from, we've had the longest rainy season, I think, in history in Tokyo. We've had something like more than 30 days with less than a total of like 3 hours sunshine. But of course, summer in Tokyo is hell, and it's just started. There was a rumor, well, there was a typhoon which was looking like it was going to come to Tokyo. It's headed towards Osaka and Kyoto instead. So we've gotten straight into the high heat. I don't know exactly what it is Fahrenheit, but basically very high humidity and 33, 35 degrees most days lately, and that's how it's going to be pretty much through September. It's pretty miserable. It's not a good time of year to come to Japan. Yes, summer has struck. What is that? That's like 100 degrees Fahrenheit. I don't know how that converts very well, but anyway, very good to see you all. Yes, actually not a lot of topics tonight, a lot of things to talk about, so I might make some music, which I haven't done for a while. I've been meaning to get the Tokyo Digital Crew thing started again, and many thanks to Tai Nakamura, who I see is there in the comments, partly prodding sharing some videos and getting that message board going. So for me as well, I've got to get back into the groove on that a little bit, but yes indeed. Quentin Ranked, so 35 degrees is 90 Fahrenheit. Yeah, well there you go. It's pretty miserable anyway. It's kind of hot and stinky. It's not a dry heat here. So anyway, let's see who's in the comments and get into it. I see that Andrea Mulboy, good to see you. Please enjoy your cycling and sports and whatnot. Feel free to do that while watching this. I'm always glad to have you in the comments though. Good to see you, Tai Nakamura. Sergeant Bilko, great to see you. We've got Tokyo 503. Sergeant Bilko, I think I just said, that's right, good to see you. Mr. Cordy Chap, awesome as always to have you. Indeed, people making butter puns, I'm not going to be triggered on that. We've got Martin Orlando, good to see you. Who else? Quint Ranked, of course, just said before. Midnight Mixer, good to see you from Chicago, Illinois. I don't recognize the name Midnight Mixer, so welcome. Good to have you in the comments there. And Believe in Yourself, awesome. I see Tokyo 503 knows about the rugby, so that's right. New Zealand did play South Africa yesterday. Typically the best game from a New Zealand perspective. South Africa's like a really tough team to beat, and it was a last minute comeback try by South Africa to draw the game, which the game was in New Zealand, so for us it's like losing. Am I worried? No. In this Rugby World Cup year, we have the Rugby World Cup in Japan later this year. It's really right now all about, in that game they were playing people out of position. They were basically preparing all of their backup scenarios to see, if a player gets injured, can they switch positions around and still play very well. So they needed to practice on that a little bit. Plus in the World Cup, they don't generally show all of their attack and all of their kind of special plans. They practice certain things, but they don't show their full hand during the Rugby Championship with Argentina, Australia, and South Africa and New Zealand. So yeah, it was a pretty tough game to watch. I mean, it was not a lot of tries being scored. It was a lot of defence. But that said, you don't know how much of it is just that the defence was that good and how much it was that the teams are kind of holding back a little bit. So I'm not worried yet about the Rugby World Cup. In fact, actually it's better. I actually prefer that we lose our games now. Because typically what would always happen to New Zealand in other years was, we would be so far ahead outside of the Rugby World Cup and we would lose only in the Rugby World Cup. I much prefer if we're going to lose that we lose now. So there we go. I am alive. Frankenhicker, that's right. I have risen from the dead. People have noticed that. I see more comments here. We've got ASMR, Sounds of Japan. That's Victor, I believe. Good to see you, Victor. Victor's been doing shows like this a little bit himself lately, filling in the gap, which I do appreciate. And yes, we do have to do a 2.5 week Hachis at some point. It's, he's got 2 kids. I've got 1 kid and I can't do it. But yeah, Mr. Quaddy Chip 35, it's not that bad, but it's different to an Australian. It's pretty miserable. The humidity is just different here. It's hard to explain, and you don't have shade in Tokyo. But anyway, who else we got in here? We got Barry Bonds. Good to see you indeed. Haven't caught a live stream in a while. I haven't been streaming in a while, so of course it's good to be back in to see you all. We've got I believe that's Kobu. I should be reading that. Asking, did I just start? Yes, I did just start. We just started the show. Good to have you along. We've got Nissan R33's Edu. Good to see you. Still waiting for that Crab Rave redo. Yes. Thank you for that. Like I say, I've just been buried lately, but hey, I might do it live. I mean, I've actually got it partly queued up, so we'll see. I don't have many topics. Don't butter him at the start. Indeed. Thank you for that. Nice puns. Yasa, good to see you. Actually, lots of people in the comments, which is awesome to see. We've got Kang and Kodos, the J-Vlog, good to see you. Hey, was I in Omotesando 2 weeks ago? I haven't been in Omotesando recently, so I don't think so. Who knows, 2 weeks ago. Probably not, but who knows. Andrea Moore asking, did I see that New Zealand won the Netball World Cup? Yes, indeed. Beating Australia by 1 point. That was pretty great. Lost the Cricket World Cup, of course, which was incredible, actually. You don't really get to watch cricket in Japan, so I was following it live on the internet. I was sort of listening to the radio on Australian Broadcasting Corporation, ABC, on the internet, and following the statistics. That was a weird game, but yes, indeed. Doesn't like rugby. Setsuna, good to see. Kang and Kodos, good to see you. We've got lots of people in here. Setsuna, awesome. And I think we've got everybody in there. The humidity in China and Hong Kong was crap too. I believe it would have definitely been. And Hong Kong will have weekend protests and riots for a while. Sad your mum will not visit family there at the moment, says Andrea Mulwood. It sounds like it's challenging there, and it's actually there's a lot of coverage tonight on the current elections in Taiwan and the impact that it's having. The Kuomintang was actually starting to do quite well. People feeling like Tsai is too sort of anti-China, but then all of everything with it. Sachigun, I'm sorry, thank you for correcting me. Kobu, I'm sorry, now that you say that, of course it is. But yes, I totally read that wrong. But yes, when people saw what was happening in Hong Kong, now the swing has gone right back again towards maybe not wanting to rejoin China quite so soon in Taiwan. So yes, having an impact. Yeah. It's Mr. Quaddy Chap indeed. Well, it's big in India, so there you go. Yes, Sachigun, I'm sorry for the for the misspelling. And you can lull. I don't know why it censored that out. But anyway, so let's get into the topics. And you're not listening yet, stuck on a phone call. But when did this start? This started at 10:40, Victor. It's written on the on the tweets. So I'm going to get into it. And what have we got over the last week? Well, actually, pardon me. So a couple of kind of not really interesting, fun stories this week, unfortunately. Kind of some depressing ones. The first one, of course, being 35 people now killed in the fire at the Kyoto Animation Studio. I don't like to do crime stories, but of course this is such a big one. And unfortunately, it kind of shows that, even in a country with no guns, for intents and purposes, no guns, stuff can still happen. Obviously, in America it's getting ridiculous. It's like they have mass shootings involving multiple people almost, it seems like every day lately. It's become routine over there. This is definitely not routine, but it goes to show that, there's always just going to be crazy people, and anyone determined is going to be able to do something crazy. I don't think that's an argument for guns at all. I think it's precisely because there are crazy people around that you want to minimize the means. But yeah, this person who apparently had no connection at all to Kyoto Anime other than having a lot of the DVDs and so on, who, apparently used to be a government worker in, was it Saitama, and lived in Ibaraki. Apparently he got this idea, it seems. He still is in hospital, and the police haven't had a chance to detain him and properly question him. But he claimed, in earshot of people who saw him being detained after the fire, that he believed that Kyoto Animation Studio had ripped off his novel, which he's never published a novel. So he was claiming plagiarism from the studio and shouting, "Show me the president." But apparently in this sort of one-way idea, that's basically some anime had taken his idea and forming it into a kind of a murderous sort of, a hate motivation. He travelled all the way down to Kyoto. He spent 3 days walking back and forth, scoping out the studio and the head office. He went to a home centre 5 kilometres from where this happened. He bought basically a trolley, a bucket, and 2 20-litre cans, jerry cans, which he filled up with petrol, and a whole bunch of knives. He trolleyed 5 kilometres up to the studio, which apparently that day was having an NHK interview, so they turned off the security. And this person from the entrance to the building just started, put all the kerosene into a bucket, poured gasoline, poured it out, and started an explosive fire. And although there's been some people saying, well, that building doesn't look very safe or easy to escape, at the same time, people were overcome while they were trying to run up the stairs to the roof. The guy used 40 litres of gasoline accelerant and got quite burned himself in the process. It's a horrible, horrible thing. It looks like a mental health thing. So I guess we're going to find out a little bit more about that. But and it looks like the studio, all the originals that the studio had created were within that building and were destroyed. So it's pretty much ended the company, at least for now. I know that there's been charity fundraising in the US and in Japan, and an outpouring of it. I myself, as you guys would know by now, I'm not a big anime fan. I don't watch a lot of anime, so I can't really gauge how famous this was. I don't know. Do any of you guys watching this? Are you familiar with Kyoto animes? I admit I haven't kept up, but it's a terrible thing, and I always kind of come back that I guess if you're in a country of 120 million people, you're just gonna get weird people. And you do worry a little bit in this sort of day and age when people live so in isolation, and through the internet there's a lot of negative reinforcement. Again, it's not really clear what sort of build-up this person had, but it does make you think as a society that we have an increasing isolation, along with increasing access to information. So you have to sort of figure out, is there some way that along with that access to information there's some way to catch people? I don't mean to put in jail either. I mean to sort of save people, like the kind of person that does this sort of thing before they go out and do it. There are so many kind of things that I think are similar to this. There are people who get drawn towards white supremacy. There've been that guy who ran that car through that protest in North Carolina. There have been these incel murders. There have been these sort of people who, well, I don't know if this is connected to any internet behavior either. This sounds like this could have very well all been inside this person's head. But again, you see a lot of people who clearly need help. And help in terms of care, actually, someone to actually help them work out. There's so many there's groups right now, it seems like, for every type of negative reinforcement. And again, we don't know much about what happened with this, and I don't know much about the impact, but yes, Yasa clarifying as well that you've watched several of their works and they've made some of the most popular series in the last 15 years. But yeah, anyway, it's a terrible, terrible thing, and it does just make you think. There isn't much that really could have been done. People do always want to look to find someone to blame. Of course, there's a person who did it. They look, could it have been more secure from a fire safety perspective? In Japan, 4-story buildings and above are required to have external staircases and extra fire safety measures. This was a 3-story building. It had 78 people inside it. But the JVlog points out the Chinese facial recognition software that is supposed to predict criminals and undesirables. Well, we know what they're using it for. They've got 1 million people in concentration camps in Western China. So yeah, probably that's not quite it. But there again, I mean, that's right. I mean, I suppose it could become one of the justifications for mass surveillance, although I don't know that in a case like this it could have made any difference. The police have made a big point about demonstrating that they can trace people's steps back. They found all the security footage. You know, the NHK every day is showing more footage of this person walking around Kyoto every day for 3 or 4 days after arriving. So they can sort of demonstrate that they can actually gather security footage. But, you know, they could never have predicted this, so, yeah, who knows. Andrea Moboy, why do they turn off security, etc. when NHK are there? Well, that's a good question, and some people have called BS on it and wondered if they always had the security turned off, which maybe they did. I could imagine if it was an excuse, it was that they were going to let a lot of people in and they wanted them to be able to walk freely around and interview people to promote the studio, perhaps, but who knows, you know. Anyway, it's a horrible story, and I do not like to talk at all about crime stories, but this was such a big one. Of course, it got international attention. Kang and Kyoto, it's more like no one does anything violent on weed. Well, yes, except, well, do I go there? It's not worth going. I am actually pro legalization. I certainly buy into any argument that compared to the addictiveness of tobacco or the harm that it both causes the taker and other people in terms of alcohol. If you're going to have a vice or a drug, it's arguably better. But there again, you know, too much weed clearly isn't good for people. Even though being stoned doesn't seem to cause it, you know, taking too much of it, you know, does seem to cause issues for people. So I do think sometimes people go a little bit too far on that. But yes. But that's right, I suppose getting off the couch can be hard in that state. I don't know that it would have made a big difference here. But anyway, that was that story. Another kind of depressing one, and geez, you know what? Just tonight I started watching Leaving Neverland, so which is a perfect lead-in, I guess, for... That's why I wince when I look at this picture of Johnny Kitagawa, because very much the same kind of allegations were always circling around him, including a libel case, which was in the end settled, but he appealed because he lost... or was it he lost a libel case that he brought against a magazine that published accounts by people who lived. So let's flash back. First of all, who is Johnny Kitagawa? He is the founder of Johnny's, which is basically the, as I understand, he's like the founder of the whole J-pop idol industry in Japan specifically. He would Hey, ASMR Japan, Victor, thank you for that. You're going to get a kakigori for the boy. Go get a big Guinness for yourself. Thank you, sir. Much appreciated. Go take care of the boy. So Johnny Kitagawa, he invented the idol industry in Japan. I mean, of course, the idol industry existed outside of Japan before this, but he, you know, the unique J-pop, specifically with boy bands in Japan, didn't start with SMAP. There were actually decades before SMAP. There were other all-male bands. But basically, he formed this sort of talent agency with this kind of idea that he would generate people who would not only be able to release CDs and sing, but who could be used for TV commercials, who could be used for like acting and drama, and could be on variety shows, kind of multimedia, you know, idols, literally, is what he built up and created a very successful model for it. And, you know, seeing that his agency was producing the highest profile and most successful male idols on television, it was pretty common. People would send their young kids away to go and basically train, you know, in the same way that they train idols today, to dance and acting and everything, and sort of intensive training inside Johnny's entertainment. You know, he would have facilities and so on. And over time, you know, well, on the first instance, you know, the biggest bands in Japan, Arashi, V6, you know, SMAP, you know, a lot of top name performers grew up and came out of the sort of production line that he set up. That you know, and in terms of the power of the studio, because they produce so many such high-profile actors who are in demand for TV commercials, variety shows, the music isn't even the main part. And in fact, another aspect of what he did was he kind of was one of the people who pioneered this kind of aspect of J-pop that sets it aside from where K-pop has become different to J-pop, which is the idea that of making idols seem accessible by not being excessively talented. It would be that they would be trained well enough that they could do acting and they could host TV shows and they could sing and do everything, but not do it too well, not be too good looking necessarily, although there are some, you know, people who are obviously selected for being good looking and whatnot. It's actually deliberate that they have people like, for example, you know, I always rag on Nakai, but it used to drive me crazy that he would on CDs sing out of tune. He would be throwing the rest of the group off tune, and it was on purpose. It was on purpose to make them seem, you know, accessible, which is kind of, you know, and they never dance perfectly in sync, or too hard or too perfectly. They never sing, you know, perfectly, and it's deliberate. But of course, the idea is that when you realize that every TV commercial break, every drama, every variety show, every news talk show, and every music show will have a member of Johnny's on it. When Johnny's decide to blacklist somebody, or when there's an unfavorable news story going out, their ability to throw their weight around, saying that if you cover this news story, you will not get access to any of our talents, or if somebody left Johnny's, for example, the ability to blacklist them and block them from getting a job anywhere, you know, was remarkable. And even when the guy freaking died, you could tell. Fact is that stories started to come out, books started to get published, weekly magazines started to publish accounts that this guy had, you know, would go into the dorm at night and pick boys out and do what I'm now hearing about Michael Jackson doing to people. You know, when he sued the weekly, he sued and lost a libel lawsuit, i.e. there was sufficient evidence based on the testimony of multiple boys that this had happened to. He was forced to settle. So, you know, and yet he was never criminally charged for it. And anyone who ever raised the allegations, they would threaten to blacklist. The published, you know, stories about this, and it's never been confirmed, included members, one of the members of SMAP. One of the members who's left, Johnny's, by the way, three left a few years ago. In fact, 4 left. I'm sorry. Nakai is still with them. He obviously knows he can't get a job anywhere else. Kimotaku's gone off to be successful on his own. He was talented and good-looking enough. The other 3 members have gone off and they've tried to become, you know, continue their work as a general talento. And they've been having trouble booking jobs because Johnny's been calling up and threatening anybody who offers them work. So, you know, real mafia style. There's a really great article here, which I linked here, which is the best coverage. It's always overseas coverage that brings up the full picture, both that one, he transformed the entertainment industry, not just in Japan, actually globally. He's had a global influence. He's one of the most influential music industry people in the world, for better or for worse. But also balanced equally with the very dark stuff that goes around that talent agency. And I'll come back. Where I contrasted it to K-pop. K-pop really did start, of course, as a Korean imitation of J-pop. I mean, that's, you know, a lot of things started that way. But what the Koreans, to their credit, and I've talked with people in the music industry about this as well, where the Koreans really set themselves aside, is that when they decided that they wanted to, like, create a global brand of having this great pop music, the music agencies there decided they weren't going to follow the Japanese model and have this kind of half-assed, you know, not quite too good looking, not quite too good at dancing, not quite too good at singing. They decided they were going to boot camp, like treat these people as, you know, basically have them become the best dancers, the best singers in the world. And it's by all accounts completely, you know, brutal. It's kind of weird, actually, just how hardcore the Korean system is. But from people I know who like are in commercial music, they point out the quality of music production, the quality of dancing, just everything over there is so much higher than in Japan, because, you know, they aim to be the best. It's different to Japan, and that's why it's become exportable. And Japanese music really isn't, at least not the idol pop music. There is a lot of very exportable Japanese music, but the pop industry, certainly Korea's gone above. But this is part of the legacy of this man. But yeah, very dark sort of a figure anyway. Not Japan news, but I just couldn't help myself. Boris is Prime Minister. I mean, part of me says, what's happening to the world? And I do think about this, and I'm interested in this. I'm interested in trying to figure out, how did it become, like, you know, everywhere for so long there's been these sort of left, right, left, right, left, right, left, right. I think people started to realize somewhere along the way, you know, the left and the right, they're not very different. You know, we're always pretty much getting the same, you know, strawberry ice cream or chocolate ice cream, but it's all still kind of ice cream. And it seems to be the right that's figured out before the left that people are looking for something, you know, different and something that's kind of new. And I do my theory on this is that the left has also really lost touch with its own voters. I mean, the reason that there's been the shift to the right, it's not that the number of right-wing people are just, having a higher birth rate. It's people on the left, it's working class. People are moving across and voting for, for populist right-wing people. Of course, this case with the UK, Boris wasn't of course a popular vote, although he was the mayor of London, and you know that being pro-Brexit, he's got the north, and he's probably got a fair number of votes in the south, even from areas that were anti-Brexit. So I don't know. I'm kind of looking at it, and I continue to think, well, maybe it's not so bad being here in Japan. I'm very careful not to say anything to my sister, who is Australian, and she is quite left-wing. And I remember her. My understanding is part of the reason she gleefully dropped her Australian. I don't think she dropped her Australian citizenship, but she took up British citizenship and moved to Britain because she hated how right-wing and redneck Australia is. And I will have to discipline myself and not say a word to her about how much more redneck Britain now seems to be. Because I know it upsets her. For me, I just find it fascinating as a social thing, like what's going on with this. Look, from my perspective, whether you voted for it or not, you have to own your democratic system and the outcomes of it, even if you don't agree with them. Otherwise, if you don't, the whole thing falls apart. So Britain needs to own Brexit. And the shortcoming May was always going to have is that, I think she made a diligent, honest effort to sell it, but she didn't believe in it. And if anyone's responsible, I mean, let's face it, selling Brexit and getting it done is kind of a punishment. And if anyone deserves that punishment of seeing it through, it's Boris, right? So leave him to it. But all I can think when I see that is I am so glad that my great-great-grandparents are all emigrated. Thank you for moving away. And I'm so glad I'm in Japan, honestly, as well. A lot of people talking about this lately. This happened to me. 1 week out of the 12-month warranty, I've got a broken Joy-Con over there as well from my son playing Fortnite. Not aggressively or hard, but yeah, the controller broke. And I'm seeing more and more stories, including from my own Twitter feed, of people who this is happening to. So yeah, Andrea Mobwe, your friend dropped her UK citizenship and is an Australian citizen. Thank goodness she knew Johnson would become PM when he first entered Parliament. Well, my sister did the opposite, and I suspect she's regretting it, but she's very committed. She's changed her accent and everything, so she's pretty full committed to becoming British, although I completely can't understand it. Especially with that, I'm not even that left-wing. I mean, I'm not really left-wing at all, actually. I mean, I treat politics like sport. I find everything interesting. But I think I'm socially liberal, but I find the economics of the left to be a little bit weird. But frankly, nothing's really good on the right nowadays anyway, and it's kind of becoming irrelevant. All the indices are becoming separate. But yes, a monarchist. Not really. No, no. Actually, you know what? No, I'm not a monarchist at all. I'm a Republican, which in New Zealand is totally rare. The idea of changing the flag and getting rid of the Queen. New Zealanders are not for it. Australians are. I guess that's the Australian part of me coming through. Totally. When I say Republican, by the way, that we mean that as in we want to become a republic, i.e. not have a... And Americans have different definitions for liberal, they have different definitions for Republican. So no, I mean in terms of the UK English sense, I believe... No, definitely not a monarchist. But anyway. Oh, my sister's a monarchist? Oh, who knows? She's... I think she'd like Stalin to be a judge. So coming back onto this, has this happened to anybody else? Because this happened to me, and it's really pissed me off, actually. And this is the one reason why I wouldn't buy one of these Nintendo lights that are going to come out with the controllers built into the unit, because you can't replace the controllers, and to send it away to get fixed, it takes weeks and it costs money. So I think Nintendo really has to fix this, and it'll be interesting to see if this class action lawsuit in the US comes to anything. But yes. Yes, a few things on, Korea-Japan relations, which we'll get into. This I just find hilarious. It's... John Bolton is going to come and mediate and find a peaceful resolution to arguably like 700 years of diplomatic tension between Korea and Japan. And you just know that every suggestion, every solution he's going to have is going to involve like attacking and bombing somebody. It's almost like he's being sent as a punishment. It's like he's become, he wanted this war with Iran, which even Trump didn't want. I mean, Trump is a lot of things, but he doesn't seem to actually be pro-war, for example. And, he's yanked back on that, and you can sort of tell there's these rumors that Bolton's on the outer, and it's almost like punishment for him to make him a peace negotiator. But he's just come and met with defense officials here and in Korea, which is funny because I'm sure you would have noticed in the course of this that, although America is best allies with Korea and best allies with Japan, the US can never make Japan and Korea cooperate on anything. And by the way, that's from the Korean side. The Japan side is open. Well, they were open to it. It's probably the patience is wearing a bit thin lately because, there have been missile locks and whatnot, returning ammunition and other sort of incidents, even at the military level, which wasn't actually supposed to be that bad. But yes, so he's here to mend the tie. So I've skipped a few weeks, but to quickly go through, there's really two big things happening. I mean, of course, there's always a whole bunch of things happening. There's all of these defense incidents. Oh, that thing was so funny the other day with a Russian plane flying over to Takeshima, Dokdo, which brought out the Korean F-16s to go and fire 400 rounds at it. Which caused Korea to complain to the Russians to complain to the Koreans, and Japan to complain to the Russians and the Koreans, because of course Japanese couldn't leave the fact that the plane was flying over territory claimed by Japan, and that the Koreans were also flying over territory claimed by Japan and firing a shit ton of machine guns, which in itself was kind of, Russia, the king of trolls. Seriously, that was masterful. Flying their bomber over Takeshima and seeing which country they could get to shoot at them. Japanese internet speculating that the Koreans probably thought it was Japanese. But in any case, the things that are happening is, of course, we've got the war labor court ruling in favor of a number of defendants who were forced to conscripted while going all the way back. Of course, Japan annexed Korea in 1910. They annexed Takeshima in 1904, 6 years before that, but Koreans say that was part of the build-up to sort of slowly, manipulating and taking advantage of Korea to finally annexing it. Kind of an edgeless. Different ways to look at it. Koreans universally are a bit like the French now. They kind of argue that everybody was in the resistance during World War II. However, of course, Koreans were able to voluntarily join the Japanese military forces. And there were large numbers of Koreans that fought for Japan. The acceptance rate was like 1 in 10. It was a low rate, and they were given really crappy jobs like prison camp guards and roles like that. But they were nominally allies during World War. Well, not really allies. It was a colony, right? So as part of the colonial rule that Japan had directly over Korea, when they conscripted wartime labor from Japan, Taiwan, and Korea, which is all part of Japan at that time, they did use a lot of people from Korea, and they conscripted them. They put them onto ships. They shipped them over to Japan. They didn't pay them. They just forced them to work to support the war effort. Supporting companies, some of which don't exist anymore, but some of which have ancestor companies, and basically that these people worked for free for a number of years and were never paid, and then after the war, became Korean and went back to Korea. So these people were effectively slave labor. They were not paid. It was conscripted war labor, which most countries sort of had, but this was different because Koreans would argue that they were a country under occupation rather than correctly annexed. And from that perspective, they were slave labor. So, a number of people have made claims against the successor companies, the Japanese companies that exist in Korea. Japan and Korea are highly economically integrated, so they brought some trials to try to get at least wages for the war period. And most of the amounts where they started to win these court cases were pretty modest, but going back, these sort of claims were brought ever since World War II, and ever since Japan established diplomatic relations with Korea. And generally the court cases always failed, and they failed for the reason that when Japan and Korea established diplomatic relations in 1965, there was a deal done that Japan was going to pay hundreds of millions in 1965 of dollars compensation. And it wasn't it's delivered so much as these were payments that were made, and it was a settling up where there would be the amounts that Japan, they tried to figure out how much would Japan owe Korea in total compensation, and how much would Korea owe Japan in terms of infrastructure and assets which the new South Korean government took over that were originally built by Japan, the railroads, the government buildings and whatnot. And the number that they ended up at was basically a resolution of all claims between the two countries. Now, it's always been kind of accepted, at least until recently, that those extinguished even personal claims, and the idea being that if individuals had claims in Korea, that they should take them to the Korean government, which received the payment, collective payment from the Japanese government. Because Korea was a military dictatorship in 1965, they obviously weren't thinking a lot about individual rights. And Park Chung-hee spent most of the money on national infrastructure development, which connected to the Korean economic miracle. I mean, the boost from Japan contributed a lot to Korea's modern success. But what they didn't do is they didn't actually pay individuals any compensation, and they never told them that the Japanese had paid them off. They just blocked all the sort of access to justice. So fast forward to now, where it's fairly frequent and common to especially for political purposes and so on, to raise the sense of historical injustice against Japan over there. When individuals started to bring individual cases for compensation in Korea, the first few cases started to recognize that individual claims were not extinguished by the 1965 treaty under Korean law. The Japanese side is that treaty was intended to cover individual cases, and that those cases should have been dealt with by the Korean by the treaty, and should be extinguished, and the court should have recognized that, and they should have gone for compensation somewhere else. But when the court started to award these payments of like $30,000 and $40,000 in back wages, the Japanese government said, well, this is a violation of the 65 treaty, so we want to have treaty negotiations that the Korean government take care and resolve these claims, or pass legislation if need be to protect Japanese companies in Korea. The Korean government said, well, we're not going to do anything against the judiciary. This is what they're saying. Everyone has to respect it. But the Japanese side is saying, well, no, this is a breach of the treaty agreement. So Japan has asked for third-party arbitration. They've tried to invoke a mechanism under the treaty for resolving disputes for the first time ever, and the Korean side ignored it and said, we don't want to do anything about it. So as this was happening, as the Korean side was basically ignoring Japan making requests to try to diplomatically resolve these cases, as Japanese company assets started to get confiscated for sale over in Korea, which kind of really threatens the position of any Japanese company in Korea, because they've always understood that they did not face this kind of litigation risk in Korea from being there. And the Korean side, obviously, with the government losing popularity, it seems like, and obviously not being in a good position to start, compromising to Japan on historical issues, especially things like slave labor, the Japanese government decided to suddenly announce it was going to revoke Korea's most favored nation status on the export of silicon wafer materials, or silicon chip materials, on the basis that they were dual use, they could be used for military purposes. And apparently Korea has a most favored nation status, where it's one of 27 countries that Japan thinks has export control standards that are sufficiently high that they don't have to check. Well, I see drama in the comments. I'm gonna focus forward again, but yes. The Japanese kind of implied when they dropped this, they said, in light of the loss of trust recently between Korea and Japan, and not just over this, over the military lock incidents and a whole bunch of other stuff as well, they said that they are going to review Korea's status as being free from double checks. The idea being that if you're exporting dual-use military-grade materials, you always need to actually explain and fill out a whole lot of extra paperwork explaining exactly what is the use of this going to be, and proof of its use, and that it's not going to be on-sold for military purposes. And this is what Taiwan is subject to, it's what China is subject to. It's only 27 countries that are exempt from this MFN status. Well, Japan said that they were going to revoke this with regards to some materials that, like, Japan controls 95% of the world's supply. This was basically treated as Japan using sanctions as economic retaliation for the war trial outcomes. Japan kind of implied that it was doing it for that reason as well, although never directly admitting to it. They said it was due to a loss of trust, and they've refused to talk to the Koreans back about the export status change, and now they're at the World Trade Organization and they're fighting about that. Japan's insisting that this is due to 156 cases of improper on-selling of dual-use military-grade materials. It's got nothing to do with the war labor thing, which, by the way, they still want to talk about. And the Korean side has gone a little bit, over the top. A lot of social boycotts and calls for boycotts, apparently, by leaders over there, and retaliation for the a lot of sister city exchanges now getting cancelled. I mean, relations are pretty much as low as they've ever been. They went to the World Trade Organization to both make their pitches. Japan saying, Korea saying this is just petty retaliation, it's against WTO rules. Japan saying this is totally actually what WTO is all about. It's about trade control, and Korea not doing it properly, and we're entitled. We don't need to give MFN status to everybody. We're entitled to delist somebody if it's justified. If it's justified here, it's justified here. So they're having this kind of fight, but it doesn't look like it's going to get any better anyway. There are some implications from the Korean president the other day that it might affect the Olympics. I.e., are they talking about boycotting? It's not clear. But more and more drama anyway. Another scandal, and this is, I've only got 2 more stories actually this week, so I might get through it quickly and get into some music. The flip side of Japan's laughter industry, Yoshimoto Kogyo in Osaka, I believe it's Osaka based, kind of Johnny's of stand-up comedian entertainment. Of course, manzai is probably the most popular comedy format in Japan. It's typically men, typically 2 guys, straight man, funny man, kind of 1950s comedy routine type setup. Of people typically with Osaka accents, one person kind of acting like the dumb guy and one guy acting like the tough, smart guy, sort of slapping the other over the head every time he says something stupid. Very popular, of course. Yoshimoto Kogyo, of course, also has a ton of popular comedians and talento that are on TV, and it is something that that mobsters like to do. They like to have, in all countries, they like to show off their entertainment industry connections, and they will, you'll often hear about entertainers getting in trouble for going out to dinner or posing for photos, or gangsters having framed photos of arm in arm with some famous celebrity. And Osaka is kind of famous for gangsters and comedians. So it seems kind of almost natural that in fact it's not the first time at all that Yoshimoto Kogyo comedians have been caught going out to dinner parties and getting paid for going out to dinners being run by criminals and gangsters. In this case, some very popular high-profile comedians were caught going to a dinner being run by scamsters, people who run scams on people, and yes, they got caught and they got sort of publicly fired by the agency, and then they came back and publicly said, hey, we actually know that these people do dinners all the time, and they have these arrangements with that comedy agency. So actually that company is deeply connected to organized crime, and that put them, and then the company apologized and took them back again, and it's just kind of a big old mess. Actually, the sensitivity, by the way, about hanging out with gangsters, I know it is kind of a thing with foreigners, that maybe they can get a job at Johnny's. Well, that would be, yes, it depends on how far they're willing to go. That's a good point, Sergeant Bilko. The thing about it is kind of funny, the relationship between foreigners and gangsters. I guess it's this thing that, for one thing, when you grow up in Japan, or when you're in Japan for a very long time, you understand the just criminals and organized crime is considered to be just something that if you get wrapped up in, your whole life will get messed up. So there's this kind of stigmatizing, social control by stigmatizing, in the sense that if you don't follow that rule of stigmatizing and ignoring organized crime and engaging with them, you're going to get into trouble. You're going to get wrapped up in it, and you deserve what comes. Which means that this is a weird thing to say, but I'm not a deep subject matter expert on this, but I know people who know people. You hear that it can be kind of a lonely life. You kind of go through a life of being, often people who are in ostracized groups become gangsters, and people who are, and gangsters naturally are ostracized as part of their existence. They're actually publicly listed and, controlled by the police. So, for people like that, and the way that they're identified and ostracized is often through things like tattoos or looking kind of tough. And look, you come from a country like New Zealand or Australia or whatever, people have tattoos all the time. You might happen to have a bunch of friends that might look tough or intimidating and actually be quite good guys. And we kind of, I think, learn, well, it depends on the culture that you're from, but from the culture that I'm from, you're supposed to, no matter how much you might be intimidated by the appearance of someone, we're always taught, give everybody a fair go. Don't judge, don't be a snob, don't think you're better than people. And I think it means that you get a lot of foreigners that come to Japan. I've heard of so many cases of foreigners who have been deported or gotten into trouble here, getting wrapped up with, particularly around drugs, but striking up friendships with gangsters, and it sounds like even arguably innocently, through casual attitudes to drugs, tattoos, looking a bit tough. It's easy for people to become friends, but within Japanese society, you're signing up for a bunch of trouble. I mean, again, just casual use of drugs here is treated the same as hard drugs. You'll be totally, deported on that sort of stuff. And just association, if you work in a respectable company and you have friends or associates who are in this sort of an industry, it's enough to justify having contracts terminated with prejudice, not even having to pay outstanding amounts. It's enough for in a country where it's very difficult to lay people off. You can be laid off right away for engaging with organized crime. So the mechanisms around it, and this is from a whole history of organized crime using connections with people in banks, entertainment to really do damage, to really get their hooks in. So it's and by the way, the tattoo thing is changing in Japan, but in terms of, hey Dan H, good to see you. It's just it seems over the top, but it's it's part of the way that the society here works. There's this over the top ostracization of organized crime, and got played out with these comedians being extremely unfunny. The final one someone suggested I put on the show tonight, so I'll put it on, but this is the South China Morning Post editorial saying that Abe should stop thinking about trying to change the constitution so that Japan can have a normal military and participate in collective defense with America, and it should focus instead on the best interest of Japan, which it describes as being friendly with China. Which I'm sure will be taken under advisement. The outcome of the election last week was that Abe has lost his ability to obtain a 2/3 majority in Parliament needed to trigger a referendum. You can't even change the constitution with a 2/3 majority. You can only trigger a referendum, which I always thought would fail in terms of changing the pacifism clause. But look, Abe is interested in changing the constitution, at least to, Japan is still under the American-imposed punishment constitution from the end of World War II, which is kind of unique that it's a bunch of things that the government will not do. It's basically written from the perspective of someone kind of punishing Japan, putting it in jail for, losing World War II. And his father was in the war cabinet, so, he's got an interest in seeing that taking pride in perhaps, and with some justification, that Japan has been a model nation citizen for the last 70 years since the war, and that it should be entitled to have a normal constitution like everybody else, which, I think there's a point to that. However, at the same time, a lot of people do take a lot of pride in the constitution and how it's underscored Japan's good behavior for the last 70 years. So, yeah. And as Yasa says, a referendum would never pass anyway, or at least not unless they made it something like giving ice cream to everybody. I think Japan's entitled to change the constitution, but I think specifically going straight for, hey, we want to get into wars again, I don't see that happening. So I don't think that, the South China Morning Post needs to be lecturing Japanese democracy. I mean, Abe is now is he now the longest serving prime minister? Certainly post-war. It's because whatever his personal qualities and whatever his personal agendas might be, he's just proven himself to be a competent leader, which after the run of the opposition current opposition being in government for 3 years, and what a disaster that was. Nobody likes him, but they vote for him because there's just no one else to vote for. So there you go. I feel like it's time for a tune. I haven't actually made a tune for a while, so let me get the setup here. Yeah, I got 10 minutes early. There weren't a lot of stories tonight. If someone's got something they'd like me to talk about, I'm of course open to that, but otherwise I am going to. You can certainly pop in, put an @ Kiko Simon, it will highlight the comment to me. But let me set this up. And got the old iPad. I could do the cork thing, or I could actually, well, GarageBand I can't really make it fast enough, so I guess I will make it cork. Oh, put that the wrong way around. Here. In fact, you know what I'm going to do? Let's take this out. Just remembered. Can I switch this? Whoa. Okay. Well, that's working, kind of. So, let us... Give me a genre. Give me a type of music to play. Ty, I can't wait to see your new music. Give me something. Give me a style, people. Give me... I'll take the first suggestion that I like. Concrete jazz. I don't know what concrete jazz sounds like. Okay, well let's give me another style of music. Glitch hop. Glitch hop. I quite like the sound of that. Okay, it sounds like a... I don't know, let's go for 92. Glitch hop. Hard pop. Reggae. Oh, got too much. I like glitch hop. So I'm gonna go for... I don't know if I can do it, but let's see what I can come up with. That's kind of cool. Oh, Ty, you're right. What happened there? Oh, there it is. I'm sorry. Okay, I've got it now. Sorry, I did not have that plugged in properly. Let me show you what I did, because that was kind of cool. So first I put this in. Okay. Thank you. This is where I'm up to. Cool. Is that not coming through? What is happening here? Oh, there it is. That's it. Sorry, I'm going to try it one more time. Okay, I'm going to try this one more time. Sorry, I didn't have it set up correctly. Let me try this one more time. Here we go. Okay. Okay, that's the show. Hope you enjoyed it. I want to check out. Have a good night, everybody. Usual technical glitches, but always fun to have you guys. And I look out for some new music soon. Look forward to hearing your stuff, Ty. I'll catch you later. Peace. See ya. See ya.